You know how everyone's saying electric cars are the future? Politicians, car companies, even those ads that pop up in your feed? Yeah, thing is, that's only half the story. Because get this, we already had an electric car revolution. Over 100 years ago, I'm serious. Way before Tesla, before the Prius, before oil crises or climate anxiety, electric cars were the thing. Back in 1900, New York had electric taxis zipping around. Silent, clean, actually kind of popular, no smoke, no hand cranking, super easy to drive, doctors loved them, women preferred them. And here's the kicker, electric cars were the most common cars on the road back then. Wild, right? And then, poof, they vanished. So what happened? Why did we forget them for nearly 100 years? And why is it now, finally, that we're ready to go electric again? This isn't just some flashy tech story. It's about the world's most misunderstood vehicle, an idea that showed up too early and then waited. We call it a revolution, but maybe it's more like coming home. Alright, let's go way back. I mean way back. Before Tesla, before Ford, before there were even highways or gas stations. In 1828, this Hungarian priest, Ányos Jedlik, put together a little electric motor. Just a small desk experiment, but hey, it worked, and it used the exact same principles as today's electric motors. Then, in 1835, something even cooler happened. A guy named Sibrandas Strating, over in Groningen in the Netherlands, built what's considered the first electric vehicle. It was tiny, like weighed only 3 kilos and could carry maybe 1.5. You couldn't recharge it and it barely moved, but the important thing, it ran on electricity. And that really matters, because it was the first hint that movement didn't need steam or explosions. It could come from silence, from clean, quiet power. Then, in 1859, things started getting real. A French physicist, Gaston Planté, came up with the first rechargeable lead-acid battery. It was clunky, not exactly sleek, but now electricity could be stored and reused, and that changed the game. Now you had a working motor and a rechargeable battery. And suddenly, inventors weren't just thinking about lights and wires anymore, they were thinking about wheels. The first electric vehicle that could actually carry a person and had its own power source? That was probably in Paris, back in 1881. A French inventor named Gustave Trouvé took it for a spin down Rue Valois. And it worked. It actually worked. But instead of sticking with cars, Trouvé thought, maybe this motor's better for boats. So he pivoted and ended up inventing the outboard motor instead. That left the door open for a German engineer named Andreas Flocken. In 1888, Flocken built what's considered the first proper electric car, the Flocken Elektrowagen. Now, it wasn't fancy. It started out as a horse-drawn carriage. But Flocken fitted it with an electric motor that pushed about 0.9 kilowatts, so around 1 horsepower. The power was transferred to the rear axle with leather belts. Top speed? About 15 kilometers an hour, but it worked. And Flocken kept making new versions all the way up until 1903. Now, up to that point, electric cars were mostly a European thing. In the US, people were still cruising around in horse-drawn wagons, except one guy, William Morrison from Des Moines, Iowa. In 1890, he builds the first American electric car. It was more of a proof of concept than something you'd buy. But still, it planted a seed. Then in 1895, this guy A.L. Riker introduces electric tricycles in the US, and suddenly things start moving fast. By 1900, electric cars are everywhere. No joke. 1 out of every 3 vehicles in the US is electric. In New York City, electric taxis are dominating. Around 90% of cabs are electric, and charging stations start popping up all over town. Names like Detroit Electric, Baker Electric, and Columbus Electric. They become huge. Back then, electric cars weren't just some futuristic idea. They were the future. You know who was really paying attention to electric cars back then? Thomas Edison. Yeah, that Edison. Light bulbs, phonographs, all of it. He honestly believed electric cars were the future, at least for city driving. But there was one big problem: the batteries. Back then they used these heavy, fragile lead-acid batteries and they sucked, so Edison decides he's going to fix it. He pours a ton of time and money into battery research at his lab in West Orange, New Jersey. And eventually he comes up with something new. The nickel-iron battery. Rechargeable. Built specifically for electric cars. Edison even teamed up with a company called Detroit Electric to make it happen. And get this. Even his buddy Henry Ford played around with Edison's batteries. Yeah, that Henry Ford. The guy who started Ford Motor Company in 1903. Some of his early car prototypes, they were electric. But in the end, Ford went all in on fossil fuels and mass production. Here's the twist though, not everyone in the Ford family was on board. His wife, Clara Ford, she loved her electric car. She drove this sleek little thing called the Detroit Electric Model 47 Brougham, ran on Edison's batteries, 108 volts, 54 cells, pretty impressive for the time, and if that car looks familiar, you've probably seen it in cartoons. It's literally the same kind of car Grandma Duck drives. So while Henry's factories were cranking out gas-powered cars for the masses, Clara was just gliding quietly around town, electric. But even Clara and Edison couldn't stop what came next. In 1911, this guy Charles Kettering invents the electric starter. Suddenly, gas cars don't need to be hand-cranked anymore, which was one of the big perks electric cars had. Then, in 1913, Henry Ford brings in the moving assembly line. Now he's building gas cars faster and cheaper than ever. Prices on his cars plummeted. Game over for the electric car. By the 1930s, electric cars are basically gone from the streets. The silent revolution just faded out. But the idea, the dream of clean, quiet, electric motion, that stuck around. It never really died. By the time we get to the 1930s, electric cars are basically gone. Gas is cheap, roads are getting better, and combustion engines, they're faster, easier to refuel, and now, thanks to Ford's assembly line, super affordable. Electric cars, too slow, too heavy, not enough range. Most of them got scrapped or just forgotten. But here's the thing, while America was racing full speed into the fossil fuel future, Europe was still quietly holding on to the idea, especially France. So, picture this. It's 1937, and Paris is hosting a massive World's Fair, the Exposition Internationale. It's all about showing off art, tech, and visions of the future. And right in the middle of it, Renault drops something completely unexpected: electric taxis. In the heart of Paris, these quiet, boxy little battery-powered cabs start cruising the streets. Renault built them specifically for the event. And get this, they didn't even need to be plugged in. Each car had this drawer-like battery tray under the floor, and when the power ran low, they just swapped out the whole battery at special stations. That's 1937. This was actually the first real examples of battery swapping, kind of a prototype for what companies like NIO are doing in several countries now. And these taxis weren't just some gimmick, they actually worked. For a little while it genuinely felt like the future was electric again, but it didn't last. Because just 2 years later, in 1939, everything changed. World War II changed everything. Fuel was rationed, rubber was hard to come by, and basically every drop of gasoline went straight to tanks, trucks, and airplanes. If you were a civilian, you had to adapt. And in occupied France, where the Germans controlled just about every resource, getting your hands on gas was almost impossible. So what did the French do? They turned back to electricity. Of course they did. Renault, Peugeot, and a bunch of smaller companies started building little electric vehicles just to keep people moving around in the cities. These things weren't built for comfort or style. They were built to survive. One of the best-known examples, the Peugeot VLV. It came out in 1941, and it was tiny, like a little two-seater electric car that looked somewhere between a golf cart and an old-school coupe. It topped out at 36 kilometers per hour and could go about 80 kilometers on a charge using 4 12-volt lead-acid batteries. Peugeot actually built a few hundred of them, 377 to be exact, before the German authorities shut it down. Probably because it was one of the only ways civilians could move around without using gas. And that made it inconvenient politically. But Peugeot wasn't the only one. Across Europe, you had all kinds of electric delivery vans, postal vehicles, even backyard conversions. By 1943, there were hundreds of electric vehicles quietly running around European cities, mostly doing deliveries, mail routes, utility work, stuff like that. In Germany, companies like Siemens and AEG were making electric trucks for city deliveries. Switzerland had electric utility vehicles on the streets. Even in the Netherlands and Scandinavia, post offices were experimenting with electric vans to keep services running. Electricity for a little while became a lifeline, not because it was trendy, not because it was green. It was born out of pure necessity. And when the war ended in 1945, gasoline came roaring back, cheap, powerful, convenient, and the internal combustion engine, it took over again, full throttle. But Renault didn't forget about the electric car, and years later, they'd try again.